The world you once knew is changing faster than anyone could have imagined, and the first signs of collapse are often the smallest: a closed sign taped to a familiar door, a locked entrance where there used to be music, laughter, and the sound of espresso machines steaming milk today. That small sign has become a massive symbol across America because Starbucks, the coffee giant that once felt untouchable, has shut its doors. The company that defined modern American life is gone, and with it, something deeper has disappeared too. A piece of what we thought was normal has vanished forever. People never thought this day would come. Starbucks was not just about coffee. It was about routine, identity, and comfort. It was part of everyday life. You could travel across the country, and no matter where you were, the green and white logo meant safety, familiarity, and consistency. It was a promise that you could sit down, order the same drink you always loved, and feel like you were home, and now all of that has been ripped away. The closure of Starbucks is about more than coffee shops shutting down. It is a symbol of the collapse of normal life in America. For decades, millions of people started their mornings with Starbucks lines of cars wrapping around drive-thrus, cups in hand, as commuters rushed to jobs, classes, and appointments. The brand was stitched into the rhythm of American life. You could set your clock by it. 6 a.m., the early birds line up. 8 a.m., the rush hour, madness. 3 p.m., the students with laptops and study group. 7 p.m., the last caffeine fix before the long night. Now those rhythms are gone, and the silence is deafening. It is easy to forget how many lives were touched by Starbucks. Take Sarah, a young barista, who started working at a location in Ohio to pay for college. She used to say Starbucks wasn't just her job. It was her family. The morning crowd knew her by name. They asked about her classes, cheered when she graduated, and cried when she told them her store was closing. Sarah said closing day felt like a funeral. She served her last latte and hugged her coworkers, while regulars stood in line just to say goodbye. Then there is Mark, a businessman from Seattle who built his entire routine around Starbucks. For 20 years, he walked into the same location every morning, ordered a grande black coffee, and sat in the same chair reading the newspaper. He said it was the only constant in his unpredictable life. When his store closed, he described it like losing a friend. He tried other cafes, but nothing felt the same. These stories repeat across America, and they show us something bigger. Starbucks was not just a brand, it was a part of people's lives. It was where first dates happened, where job interviews were held, where students pulled all-nighters, where writers finished books, where strangers became friends. It was where America lived in between all the big moments of life. Now those places are gone, and with them a piece of America's identity disappeared too. The collapse of Starbucks did not happen overnight. It was building for years. Costs were rising, inflation hit hard, supply chains broke down. Fewer people were commuting to work after the pandemic. Remote work changed habits. People started brewing at home with fancy machines or supporting small independent shops. Younger generations began rejecting big corporate brands, preferring local, authentic experiences. Starbucks tried to adapt, adding new drinks, new apps, delivery options. But it was like trying to stop a storm with an umbrella. The collapse of Starbucks is more than economic, it is cultural and emotional. It shows us how fragile our sense of normal really is. We thought morning coffee runs were permanent. We thought that green logo would always be there. But nothing lasts forever. The collapse is a wake-up call, a reminder that the things we depend on can vanish faster than we think. If Starbucks can collapse, what else is vulnerable? Malls already look like ghost towns. Grocery stores are struggling. Movie theaters are closing, banks are moving online. Whole parts of daily life are dissolving and leaving behind uncertainty. And that uncertainty is frightening because it forces us to realize that the world we grew up in is not coming back. We are living through the collapse of normal life in America. And yet inside this collapse there are new stories being written. Independent coffee shops are suddenly thriving. Places that were once overlooked are now full. Local owners like Maria in Austin say customers who never noticed her tiny cafe are now flooding in looking for community and connection. She said something powerful. People are realizing that coffee was never about speed or logos. It was about feeling human again. Starbucks may be gone, but new spaces are growing in its place. And maybe that is the lesson hidden inside all this. Maybe normal life was never about giant chains or global brands. Maybe it was always about the small rituals, the shared experiences, the connections we make. When Starbucks falls, we realize we can build something new, but it will take effort and imagination. If you are still with us now, you know how big this moment feels, and I want to pause to say something important. If this story resonates with you, subscribe right now to stay connected, because more collapses are coming, and we will be here to explore them with you. Share this with friends and family, because these stories are not just about business. They are about all of us. And together we can start building a conversation about the world that is being born from the ashes of the old. Subscribe, share, and comment, because your voice matters in this moment. The fall of Starbucks is also a story about memory. People will look back and remember their favorite drinks, the pumpkin spice lattes that marked the start of autumn, the red cups that announced the holidays, the taste of iced coffee on a hot summer afternoon. These small things carried so much weight. They were markers of time, rituals that gave meaning to ordinary days. Without them, the calendar feels emptier, the seasons less defined. This is why the collapse hurts so much. It is not about losing a place to buy coffee. It is about losing a piece of culture that tied us together. For some people, it is like losing childhood memories. For others, it is like losing stability. But history teaches us something. Every collapse makes room for reinvention. America has always reinvented itself after moments of loss. The Great Depression gave birth to new industries. The closure of factories led to new technologies. The end of one era always opens the door to another. Losing a friend, unpredictable life, cafes, stories, bigger part of people's lives. Places gone, America's identity. Collapse building for years, rising costs. Remote work, changing habits. Collapse, cultural and emotional. Fragile sense of normal. Wake-up call dependent on vulnerable. Grocery stores struggling, daily life dissolving. Living through collapse. New stories being written. Small rituals, connections we make. Subscription. Stay connected. More collapses coming. Memory. Favorite drinks, pumpkin spice lattes. Collapse hurts, losing a piece of culture. History, collapse makes room for reinvention. America has always reinvented itself after moments of loss. The Great Depression gave birth to new industries. The closure of factories led to new technologies. The end of one era always opens the door to another. Starbucks closing may feel like the end of normal life, but it may also be the start of something more authentic, more connected to people than to corporations. Imagine neighborhoods filled with unique coffee shops, each with its own story, its own flavor, its own community. Instead of one giant chain controlling the culture, thousands of small businesses could thrive. People could rediscover the beauty of local places, the power of human connection. That is the hope buried in this collapse. But hope does not erase the pain. Walk down the street today and you see darkened Starbucks windows papered over with signs, furniture left behind, seasonal posters advertising drinks that will never return. You see customers standing outside pausing, staring like they are looking at a ghost. The silence is haunting. This is not just the end of a company, it is the end of a way of life, and people feel that in their bones. And that is why this moment matters. Because when we lose something so familiar, we are forced to ask, who are we without it? What do we build in its place? What does normal life mean when the things we thought were permanent are gone? Maybe the collapse of Starbucks is not the story of a failure. Maybe it is the story of America waking up to a new chapter. A chapter where we stop relying on massive corporations to define our routines and start creating our own rituals again. A chapter where community matters more than convenience, where local identity matters more than global branding. A chapter where we realize normal life was never about coffee. It was, and now that stage is gone, but the play continues. It continues with us. You watching this right now are part of that story. The collapse of Starbucks is the collapse of normal life, but it is also the beginning of something new, something we do not fully understand yet, but something that is waiting to be created. And the question is, what role will you play in building that new world? Will you cling to the past or help imagine the future? Because the collapse is here, the end of normal life is real, and what happens next depends on all of us.